started off as Pastor Mackenzie, and after many mass graves and over 100 lives, he is now a terrorist, a mass murderer, and just Mr. Mackenzie. Shakahola is an ongoing horror. We can only promise an update tonight, and as no one knows what the end looks like and when it shall be. And talking of not knowing, do we know much at all in the first place? We shall find out after clearing the area of all cameras. Then there was some commotion in a high-end estate, and the parties and players too were, well, high-end. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta was up and about at Jubilee headquarters, and he got tags wagging and some clean pair of heels from the police. My take tonight is a point of order for Gatundu South constituency. Jamila's memo is addressed to her grandmother, notifying the old lady to undergo refresher courses on that mute button on the TV remote control. Sam Sense doesn't really see sense in the crazy math exercise involving the national government and county governors. And on Kaikai's kicker, from Shakahola to Etihad Stadium in Manchester City. It's a cruel week of character development for Kenyans. The gang is home.
There is no difference between Mr. Mackenzie, who pretends and postures as a pastor when in fact he is a terrible criminal. Terrorists use religion to advance their heinous acts. People like Mr. Mackenzie are using religion to do exactly the same thing.
Over and above terrorism, I am convinced beyond doubt that a case can be built for charging Mr. Mackenzie and all his collaborators, including those who helped him to dig graves and dispose bodies who have been murdered. It is possible to charge them with a crime of genocide under international and Kenyan law.
So finally, we had the high-level government presence at Shakahola this week, seeing a flurry of activity from all leaders, including the security personnel there as well. And that is what we will be talking about over the next few minutes, the Shakahola massacre. Please, we invite your views at Citizen TV Kenya. The hashtag is NEWSGANG. Please share your thoughts with us on the same. So that is where we want to begin with the latest, up to date. Obviously, a lot has happened over, is it a period of 14 days, I think, with 7 days of now exhumation of bodies. Jamila, just, give us a status update, what's happened, the very latest.
Okay. As of today, this evening, Yvonne, 109 bodies have been recovered from Shakahola forest. These include those that have been exhumed from the graves and those that have been found in the forest, and those of people who had died maybe on their way to hospital after being rescued from the forest after fasting, not eating and drinking, following whatever orders they got from Paul Mackenzie of the Good News International Church, who is in police custody now, awaiting charges to be preferred against him. And Yvonne, today also there was another update that I think I need to talk about before we go back to Shakahola, where another pastor, Ezekiel Odero of the New Life Prayer Center in Kilifi, also has been arrested and is expected to be arraigned in court tomorrow over charges that are associated with deaths that have been unexplained from his church. And about 100 people who are inside the church premises today were also asked to come and record statements about what was happening in the church. And what was interesting is that some of the investigators and the police say that they've been the number of people who have bodies that have been brought into the Malindi Sub-County Hospital mortuary in the past month or so has been suspicious, because the morgue has a capacity of about 20. And it's been almost full for the past month. And some of those bodies are being brought, they're unidentified, undocumented bodies by people who are associated with Pastor Ezekiel's church. So there is that. But then now there is what has been going on in Shakahola. And Yvonne, I think it's important to point out here now is that the media and human rights organizations have been in Shakahola for way longer than government officials have been, for about 2 weeks now. This is the 7th day since the exhumation of bodies started. And I think government officials started arriving there this past Monday, when already I think there had been 3 days of bodies being exhumed. And of course, 11 bodies here, 17, 18. And speaking to our journalists who are on the ground, they tell us that originally 32 sites had been identified for exhumation. That is before the exercise even started. And I think by yesterday, the day before yesterday, before media was barred from getting in there, they had only started exhuming bodies from 2 sites out of 32. So this shows you that this is something that's going to take quite a bit of time. But then now, yesterday, media was barred from going into the forest. Human rights groups on human rights representatives who've been there from the beginning were also denied entry into Shakahola. And the reason given was that the area around Shakahola, it's called the Chakama Ranch, and all that land around it, which is measuring about 20,418 hectares, is a disturbed area. It's a scene of crime. And because of that, that is why the place has been blocked and no access. And that was after Interior Security Minister Kithure Kindiki arrived at the place. So the question that the media is asking is why now? Why are we being denied entry into Shakahola, considering the fact that we've been there since the beginning? They are told, oh, you're slowing down the process. That is one of the reasons given for that decision, other than it being declared a crime scene. But then they're saying it doesn't make any sense when we've been there from the beginning. And then now they have to wait for reports on the road. I was speaking to our crew and they said they have been pushed to the road, nowhere near the scene. They can't see anything from where they are. And they have to keep waiting for regular briefings from the RC. And he says they don't even allow you to ask questions. So a statement is given and that's it. And that is also interesting, is that since yesterday and today, you know, we had been hearing that this number of people have been rescued, 2 people, 3 people. There's been nobody who's been rescued in the past 2 days. And then a lot of questions. So what is the narrative? What is being hidden? Kwenini inafichwa? Kwenini inaendelea huko? You know, so I think denying media access to an area where they've been in for days and weeks before government decided to take whatever was happening in Shakahola with the seriousness that it deserves, really is raising a lot of questions about nini inafichwa.
And I think the Media Council as well, speaking on this issue, saying, you know, there's the possibility now of the spread of misinformation if there is not enough information that's coming out. And Linus, that's an interesting development, considering, you know, Hussein Khalid and the team, you know, of human rights activists have been on the site. In fact, we have seen them participating in the rescue, you know, of some of the victims, and, you know, trying to urge them to drink and to just find out what's happening there. So the idea of then barring, you know, access to the site, that's an interesting development.
Yes, it is, and it's an old ritual that has been performed by governments, successive governments in different situations. I don't know why, especially security authorities, feel sealing a place and limiting information and limiting movement is necessarily a sign of efficiency. I think the authorities ought to come from the point of appreciation of the role played by the media and human rights organizations in bringing this problem to the fore. The reports started streaming out very slowly, and you remember in our own newsroom conversations with Pamela, you know, saying 2 people, then 4 people, you know, have been reported dead, dying of starvation because of some cult. It started off by first of all looking really insignificant. The sort of thing that editors would go slow on and see how it happened. And then slowly, you know, 5 and past 5 people, it started becoming something of a very, very serious magnitude. And tonight, even as we have this discussion, the real full magnitude of this is yet to be known, because we do not know how many more graves are out there. What we can say is the trend is worrying. When you go to one grave and you find 5 bodies, up to 8 bodies, this is really, really worrying. There are also some questions that are still awaiting answers, and one of them is, how long has this possibly been going on? And these are questions that will be answered, especially once the government pathologist gets to the scene, where they'll then be able to determine how long a body, for example, has been in that state of decomposition. So we do not know. It could be weeks, it could be months. But when you look at the numbers, the sheer numbers, well past 100 now, then we are talking of something that may have been going on for several months. And of course, Shakahola is just putting many, many questions to the table. And there have been many questions that have been asked around here by Sam Gituko here in the morning show. Wahiga was here the other day with the governor of Kilifi. And there are very few answers. That's what we can say. At this stage, there are very few answers as to what is going on. I think the person who really knows what has gone on is Pastor Paul Mackenzie. That is the person who really knows what may have transpired in Shakahola, why we have so many mass graves, and why we have so many people dead. And so the next few days, I think there'll be all these questions that will need to be answered, including how did we miss all this? When you look at our neighborhoods, wherever you come from, even if it's a vast area, even those nomadic plains where very few families live, it's not possible for one person to die and information doesn't come out. But 100 and we know nothing, this is really strange.
And to die and be buried in the manner in which that is happening. I think Red Cross is now also reporting that they've received reports of 300, over 300 people missing. And you know,
and 150 of those are children.
And 150 of those are children, that's right. And you know, a lot of these reports, many of them are coming from people who've started to report their missing kin over the last couple of months, I think dating back to October, November last year. But you see, this church has been running for years. And, you know, just as you talk about, you know, what happened, how did this happen for so long? Government is now saying, okay, well, perhaps it's not time for blame game yet. You know, let's focus on rescuing now. But I want us to listen to Professor Kithure Kindiki, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, on what we're likely to see happen now. Like we've said, the only person who really knows exactly what's been happening at Shakahola is Mr. Pastor Paul Mackenzie. And now Kithure Kindiki is saying these are the charges they're going to prefer against him.
Above terrorism, I am convinced beyond doubt that a case can be built for charging Mr. Mackenzie and all his collaborators, including those who helped him to dig graves and dispose bodies who have been murdered. It is possible to charge them with a crime of genocide under international and Kenyan law.
Yeah, and now this is the question of, first of all, who is culpable? Like the CS has said there, not just Paul Mackenzie, but all those who helped to bury the bodies. So who is going to be held responsible, and how are we going to hold them responsible? This has also been a matter of great debate in the country and trying to seek understanding as to what sort of charges would stick. I'll come back to the lawyer in the room in a moment. But Sam, again, you know, here's an issue. Would he be charged with terrorism? Is it crimes against humanity? People are calling this a genocide, a massacre. You know, all of these very heavy terms being used.
Right, and you can't help but notice the moving target, because it started off with a statement from Professor Kindiki saying that this is a massacre. And then I think a few days later, or maybe the following day, the president was talking about he's a terrorist, he belongs to the prisons. And then a day later, you find Professor Kindiki in Shakahola this time saying that this is genocide. And you see, to understand what exactly that is going to be, because genocide you're talking about, you almost want to cleanse a population like the best example is what we know happened in Rwanda against the Tutsi by the Hutu. So to prove that is quite difficult because these persons that you're saying they are the victims now, some of them have died, some of them have survived, but you can see their health is really compromised. So what ethnic community do they come from? So how do you really identify them to say that they are being targeted for genocide? If it's about terrorism, how exactly did that happen? Because, of course, this has to be founded in law, which Lina is going to be telling us about. But also a massacre, I don't know that there is such an offense in the Kenyan laws about a massacre. I've been speaking to different lawyers and prosecutors, just wondering, what could it be? Is it murder? Because if it's murder, then how was that act of murder committed? What was the motive? Yeah. So those are answers that must be given by the prosecutors even before they're able to take the matter before court. If you're talking about manslaughter, how exactly? If you're talking about aiding suicide, so who are you talking about here? Because once a person has died, then that's not a case of attempted suicide. They have already died. So it's going to be very interesting on how the government and, of course, the investigating agencies and the ODPP, they are going to go about this. But, of course, Professor Kithure Kindiki is a professor of law, and he says that he's convinced beyond reasonable doubt that a case can be built around terrorism. But also it's the reality, the confusing situation that you're in. I saw Nuruddin Haji calling for time. He was saying that they are hoping that they can be given enough time because they'll be requiring a lot of time to come through Shakahola, that land that Jamil is describing here. And I think it's also good to listen to Kome, the Inspector General of Police, Japhet Kome, as well as the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, on what they had to say on who exactly should be blamed for what has just happened.
We effect arrests when any person commits a criminal offense. We effect arrests, then present to judiciary, which we shall have done our part. Therefore, as I've told you, this person in 2017, that is when the National Police Service got interested in his activities. And we arrested him. Not once, on a number of occasions, and you have presented it before the court of law. Then DPP will argue the matter before court.
So I hope when we go to court, they will be able to give us the number of days we require. It looks like we will require a lot of days to be able to comb this 800-acre of farmland and make sure that there are no bodies left or not exhumed.
Right, and of course, it's interesting to find such kind of explanation coming from the Inspector General. Of course, at that time in 2017, he wasn't the Inspector General of Police. It was someone else, but now he's in charge. But also the DPP is saying that he's hoping that they can be given enough time. But even if, because I see that the judiciary now is saying that it's going to probe all the cases that have been leveled against Paul Mackenzie and what actions were taken, who was involved, and what exactly may have happened, it is also important to note that despite the fact that, yes, maybe the judiciary let down the country, but what happened to the National Intelligence Service? What happened to the National Police Service? What happened to Nyumba Kumi, the chiefs in Shakahola? Did they have to wait for the judiciary to give a decision or allow them to go ahead and monitor what's happening in Shakahola? I do not think so. So even as we pursue that direction, there are still very many questions that need to be answered, and especially coming from the national government administrative officers or administration officers that have been in Kilifi County. The other day I saw the deputy governor of Kilifi going there, and I think he reported their way after Japhet Koome and the DPP had been to Shakahola. And of course, they're there to see what's going on, what's happening. And I wondered, and I was asking someone, is he a new governor, a new deputy governor of Kilifi? Bearing in mind that if these things have been, they are being reported on the media, he didn't take any keen interest to go and see what exactly is happening to his population? Yeah,
in his county. And, you know, like we're seeing the blame game back and forth, including Jamila, the members of the family. Yeah. You know, they lost 7 members who are today saying they went to the police, they reported these matters. In fact, even the, sorry, I'm mixing up my facts here. The co-founders of this church said that, you know, when they started the church and when things started to go awry, they went to the police and said, look, something is happening here and it's not right. And that was years ago. Exactly. And they say, you know, the police did nothing. The police didn't take them seriously. And now even today we've seen from the judiciary, and if we get a chance, we can just run some of those graphics for you. We had that story earlier today. Now, the judiciary listing the litany of cases that they've had that have been and currently against Paul Mackenzie. So this is what you see. You know, the judiciary is saying, hey, okay, this is what we've done, you know. The police on the spot for not responding. And then now you're also seeing some very public statements, Linus, from all of these individuals. This is what we will charge them with. Is it a bit hasty on their part to perhaps just, you know, wait this out, go back, look at everything? In fact, the autopsies are beginning tomorrow. So how can we even begin to talk about what charges we're going to prefer when even the cause of death for many of them is yet to be fully determined and ascertained by the government pathologist? What do you make of all this reaction back and forth from the people that should have been responsible for making sure that this doesn't happen?
I think I would call it an emotional reaction that goes in line with the environment, where there is shock, so many deaths being reported. And in the case of the authorities, and with this I have in mind Professor Kindiki, who is in charge of Interior, obviously the questions of systemic failures on the part of authorities, starting, as you rightly point out, from the police to the National Intelligence Service. And what will happen here, it's very expected of a public official to feel the pressure to give something to the public. And I think that was Kindiki's moment when he said that this is a genocide. He is a very solid legal scholar, very highly respected. And, you know, with time we'll get to know exactly what the charges will be. But it's very, very unlikely that a charge of genocide can be sustained, because what is going on there doesn't remotely meet the definition of genocide. We've already seen, just by looking at a profile of those people reporting their persons who are missing, that some are coming from Western Kenya, some from Nyanza. I think there's Kisii as well. We saw Central Kenya as well. So they come from different parts of the country. And when you talk of genocide charges, genocide is about eliminating a particular group of people, meaning then they have to be of a uniform ethnicity. And what we are seeing is the profile of the victims so far, and just going by the relatives who have already spoken, we can't say they come from the same tribe.
And Linus, we're yet to even fully understand the entirety of this. Graves are still being dug up, bodies are still being found, family are still coming to say our loved ones are missing, haven't even identified the bodies so as to sort of determine a pattern, right?
Absolutely. And remember, there's never been anything like this, at least from the religious side of things. We've not, we've lost Kenyans to in huge numbers through terror attacks. 98, the bombing of the American embassy. In 2013, we had Westgate. We've also had Riverside, Dusit.
Garissa University.
And Garissa University. All these mass killings were through terrorism. We saw President Ruto saying this is terrorism. Of course, we will be looking at how the prosecution will process the charges. And we need, first of all, to get the information. What really transpired and how did these deaths occur, so that we then get a definition and framing of charges. So on the legal space, there is a wait and see to see what the prosecution, what the police, what the investigators will come up with.
And Yvonne, something I can add on to what listeners was talking about, and you mentioned about the process of identifying the bodies, and that's what some of the relatives are doing now when they go to the Malindi Sub-County Hospital morgue for DNA. They're giving the DNA samples so they can start identifying. For instance, the family you're talking about of the lady who was a co-founder of the church. 7 members of her family are missing. Her daughter, her grandkids and great-grandkids are missing. And they talk about how when they started the church, the teachings were completely different, and they left when they realized that Paul Mackenzie was starting to change the teachings that they had originally had when they started the church. And something you talked about, what families are saying and what that family said in particular, Yvonne, and if you allow me, I'd just like to quote what the son of that lady said. He says, mimi mwenyewe nilienda kupiga ripoti Malindi mara mbili. Ndugu yangu pia akienda kupiga ripoti. Hata kuna wakati mwingine tukamchukua mama yetu aende kupiga ripoti, kuongeza uzito. Lakini polisi wakasema ni mambo ya imani ya watu wazima. There's a mzee from Siaya who lost 3 sons. And he talks about how he kept trying to find help. And he says he couldn't even get help from police officers in Malindi. He actually had to go all the way to Nairobi to arrest Paul Mackenzie. And even then, an informer told him that Mackenzie had been released without a charge. And he says, afisa watoto anaitwa Mariam akaniambia, wewe umekaa hapa ati unatrakiwa watoto. Na Mackenzie ndio yule ameachiliwa na OCPD, anaenda. Nikamfuata, nikaona ndio yule kwa gate, anatoka. Nikaenda nikamrukia, nikamshika, nikamuuliza, pastor unaenda wapi? Watoto wangu wako wapi? Mimi nilijua umeshikwa, tuende na wewe Mumias, lakini mwachiliwa unaenda wapi? Officers at the station rounded this mzee up and grilled him on his motive and told him, kwani mhubiri anaweza kutaka kuiba watoto? Wapi birth certificate watoto? So these are what people are telling you about what they experienced when they went to the police station in Malindi. Because we're asking ourselves, so how could this have gone on for so long and no one would know anything? And then now, there is a whistleblower, finally. A whistleblower who came and said there's something going on in there, you all need to follow up. Who's now a witness? But then now, Yvonne, questions are also coming up about the state of the bodies. A story that was done by Hassan Mugambi. I know the government pathologist is going to start the autopsy process tomorrow, but some of those bodies, because we are told they died, most of these people from not eating or drinking, but there are some who have strangulation marks around their necks. There are people who actually seem well fed and okay and not who have died from not eating and drinking. So a lot of questions are rising about how exactly did these people die. And finally, you talk about what the judiciary released a statement today about all those cases against Mackenzie from 2017. There are some where he was acquitted. There were some where he paid bail and he was released. There was no evidence and the case ended. Some are pending. But then now the JSC says it's going to investigate judicial officers who were involved in cases from 2017 to date. So, all this blame game, it's now stretching across not just authorities in Malindi and Kilifi, but also now in the judiciary about exactly how did this gentleman slip through the cracks and do, well, what he is said to have done.
Yeah, there's something important you've said about how the police responded or didn't, to all of these claims and reports that were being made there. And I have to wonder, is this a learning moment for us in terms of how the law deals with matters of religion and religious institutions? So certainly this is not the first time we're hearing of or having issues with religious institutions that are alleged to have gone too far. There have been many, there's, the Kavanokia, there's the Finger of God, there's so many other churches that have had that. But is there a sense that the police, the judiciary, the law enforcement just don't know how to deal with these matters, Sam. So, you know, so that even, and by the way, that same issue also comes up when you talk about regulation. You know, then everyone's like, oh, but you know, these are religious institutions. You know, how far can we go? Is that, you know, infringing on the freedom of worship and the right to people to associate? And so, you know, that's where we find ourselves. So police are saying, haya ni mambo ya dini, sasa tutaingilia namna gani? Remember when the issue of regulations came up back in 2016, you know, the churches were saying, no, there's only so far you can go with this. You know, you go until here, and, you know, you can't do the rest. So how do we deal?
First of all, I'm looking at the Prevention of Terrorism Act, number 30 of 2012, and I'm looking at the definition of a terrorist act. It means an act or threat of action which involves the use of violence against a person. It may also endanger the life of a person other than the person committing the action. It creates a serious risk to the health or safety of the public or a section of the public, and so many other issues that are listed there. So the professor is saying, that is the cabinet secretary is saying, that he's convinced that they can frame charges around these. Yeah, there are certain lines that you'd say that might define, because when you're saying creates a serious risk to the health or safety of the public or a section of the public, then there's a possibility that that is something that they can use. But also, if you're to define terrorism from what you've seen, the violence, most of the time armed, or what was witnessed in Mpeketoni, then it becomes difficult really to stand trial in court. But obviously, we'll be waiting to see what that means in the coming days. But then now you talk about the police being unable to do anything when it comes to matters of faith. And if you had to look at the process of registration of a church, for instance, if today Yvonne, you wanted to open a church, you'd have to go to the Register of Societies, because that's the office that is required to be dealing with that. But there are certain things that you have to do. You have to present certain documentation, including the name of the church that you want to register. For instance, if it's a church, that is, it's not limited to just Christianity. It may also be, if you want to open a place of worship for different other faiths. But now, even as you do that, it may take up between 4 and 8 months for you to get that clearance. But then after the registration, there is what you must do with the Register of Societies. You have to keep filing annual returns to also show the membership, the activities you've been able to do, the sort of finances that you've been able to utilize, and how far you're going. But then, apart from that, once you submit your returns, it is up to the registrar to decide what to do with that information. If he or she needs extra information, he or she may request for it. But it's not a requirement that you must provide all the information that may be in your possession, bearing in mind also that the registrar does not necessarily have any supervisory roles over such an organization. So really, and that's the difficulty that you have, that you have so many religious groupings. On, I think it was either on Monday or Tuesday, I was speaking to some of the panelists, and they were telling me that in some estates, including here in Nairobi, every 2 structures that you move, you'll find there's a church somewhere, and they're actually headquarters. So, it's quite interesting. I don't want to name the name because I haven't verified, but you can imagine that if every other person, your life is not working, the things that you're trying to do, you can't find a job, your income is not sufficient, then you decide to take the Bible to open a church and get fortunes coming your way economically.
And you know, some of those Githu proposals in 2016 that were as controversial then as they are today was including that if you were a foreign pastor or religious leader, that you would first need a work permit to work in the country, and a recommendation from your government that you needed to file annual returns. You also needed to convene at least one general meeting in a year, during which you would have all the members present, and you would then give an account to them of the funds that you have received and how those funds have been used. And then there was the other one about everyone who leads such a religious institution requires a theological certificate or is it a theologian certificate from an accredited theological institution? And I remember, at the time there was the question about whether, the faith or the calling is bestowed upon one, or whether it is an academic requirement. Needless to say, here we are. Some of those are of course, enforced, like you have to register, your church. And so some of the questions that come up with Pastor Paul Mackenzie's and the others is, are they registered? Do they file those returns? What is the method there? But, again, Linus, the issue of regulating churches and religious institutions, some say regulating faith. Again, we are faced with this conundrum.
Absolutely, and I think what Shakahola has achieved in a very brutal way is to force Kenyans to have a conversation about this religious space. Because let's face it, religion, just like politics, has become one of the darkest hideouts for some of the most cruel crooks in the country. They function almost in similar ways. It's about people. It's about influence. It's about money and power. There's so much that goes on these days that honestly lends itself to questions on what religion is. In the name of God, a lot of things have been done that are very, very interesting. Listen to some of the stories, some that we cover, others that we ignore, about auditing of churches when it comes to even simple things like offerings. There are a lot of human beings out there, they're not saints, which is why we can't continue claiming that religion should not be regulated.
Yeah.
Now, for some of the oldest institutions, they have also found that you must do that, whether it's about the process of deciding who should be the clerics. There should be basic requirements. And I hear the argument from some of those who oppose what they call regulation of religion. They say, no, preaching is a calling. But so is journalism, and so is being a doctor, being a lawyer. These are things that are ordained by God too. But there are certain preliminaries that you have to go through to ensure that you are suitable and fine to do that assignment. I think Shakahola will force Kenyans to have the conversation it refused to have with Professor Githu Muigai when he came up with those very sensible regulations. And for the simple fact that though religion was used as an instrument and a tool of organizing society, it also has the other extreme, which is wreak chaos in society.
Yeah.
And that is what we are seeing. Look at what was being preached in Shakahola. Don't go to school. It's an earthly thing. Don't go to hospital. Forget about the earth. Don't even eat. Just starve and be ready to go to heaven. These are the extremes that you achieve if you don't put on check some of those preachings out there. And there is so much happening right now in Kenya, like it's been described, a church every block.
Yeah.
And you can tell very well that it has also become a way of living.
Yeah.
Some time back we had a kicker here on some of those activities where pastors actually claim to heal the sick. And very well, we've covered a number of stories indicating that some of these are utter falsehoods, which are not being found punishable because we have this fear of religion. It's a space of God. Some of these things we are witnessing are not godly activities. Yeah. And I think Shakahola is a moment for all of us, especially the majority of those who live in denial that they are crooks who are hiding in religion, just as there are many also hiding in politics.
Indeed. On that note, let's take a break. And, you mentioned that, and just as we take that break, it reminds me of, remember the Loliondo saga? That was years ago. There was this self-proclaimed healer who people made sojourns to Tanzania. By the way, that story was, I think, broken and covered by Pamela Sigi.
Pamela, yes.
And John Allen.
Our managing editor, yes. So
in fact, Pamela went back, I think, last year or the year before.
Yes.
Yeah, and
right.
found Babu still there. Of course, the masses were not flocking as they did back then.
Exactly.
And he's died now, Babu Loliondo. But yeah, that was...
And here's one more food for thought as we take the break. So Pastor Mackenzie was asking his followers to starve to death to meet their maker, but he wasn't in a hurry to meet his maker. He didn't starve himself to death.
What's the name of the church again?
Good News International.
Good News International.
There's been quite a lot of bad news.
Bad news from Shakahola.
Yeah. So not leading from the front. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, with all of this that we'll continue to, of course, follow, like we've said, a lot we don't know and we'll continue to learn. But there's some interesting things we saw and learned. The former president was out and about, as we say, Uhuru Mtaani, when we come back on NewsGang.